The sun had barely risen over the bustling city of Phoenix, Arizona, but the halls of Hamilton and Reese were already alive with energy. The firm's imposing glass tower stretched high into the sky, a shimmering testament to power and prestige. Within its sleek walls, executives barked orders into phones, junior analysts scrambled to meet impossible deadlines, and secretaries juggled meetings like circus performers. Denise Parker, a middle-aged black woman with a sturdy frame and kind eyes, pushed her cleaning cart down the gleaming marble floors. Her uniform, a simple navy blue jumpsuit with the company's logo stitched over the chest, fit her well, though it did little to shield her from the coldness of her surroundings. Denise's hands bore the calluses of hard work, her muscles used to the daily grind that never seemed to end. But she moved with a quiet grace, her presence barely acknowledged by those who towered above her in power and paychecks. She worked the early shift, starting before dawn and often staying well past sunset. It was the way of things. The high and mighty expected their offices to be spotless, their conference rooms pristine, and their egos undisturbed by the presence of someone like her. Denise had been working at Hamilton and Reese for nearly 2 decades, her diligence unbroken by condescension or cruelty. She had raised 2 children on this job, put them through college, and built a life from the scraps of opportunity thrown her way. But respect was a luxury not afforded to those who scrubbed toilets and emptied trash cans. As Denise moved from room to room, collecting discarded coffee cups and wiping down tables stained with arrogance, she overheard the same tired remarks. It was almost routine now, the way the executives treated her presence like background noise. They gossiped, boasted, and belittled others as if she wasn't even there, as if her uniform rendered her invisible. "Have you seen her? She's always here. You'd think she owns the place," snickered Ethan Brooks, a junior manager with a sharp suit and a sharper tongue. His words were slick with privilege, dripping with the certainty that his world would never overlap with Denise's. "She probably makes more money off overtime than some of our interns," chimed in Julia Sanders, her laughter light and dismissive, like the clinking of fine glass. "Imagine doing that job for 20 years, Ethan continued, his voice rising for emphasis. "Couldn't be me." Their laughter filled the break room like a sour perfume. Denise's hands paused momentarily as she wiped down the counter near them. The slightest narrowing of her eyes was her only reaction. Years of experience had taught her to swallow indignities without choking. Still, something about Ethan's arrogance pierced her patience. Across the room, a young intern named Mark Stevens stood frozen in the doorway, gripping his coffee cup with knuckles turning white. Mark was only a month into his internship, a bright-eyed kid from Ohio, trying to make his mark in the world of high finance. The easy cruelty of his colleagues made his stomach turn, but his discomfort was drowned by the pressure to fit in. Speaking up could ruin him before his career even started. Denise finished wiping the counter and moved on, pushing her cart toward the next office. Her steps were steady, her expression unreadable. Behind her, the laughter continued, unbroken and unconcerned. Mark hesitated before finally shuffling away, his mind tangled with guilt and frustration. He had been raised to respect everyone, regardless of their job or status. His parents had worked tirelessly to give him the opportunities he now enjoyed. His mother had been a school teacher, his father a construction worker. They had taught him the value of hard work, of humility, of kindness. And yet, here he was, complicit in the quiet cruelty of Hamilton and Reese's corporate culture. His conscience screamed at him to speak up, to call Ethan and Julia out for their blatant disrespect. But the voice of ambition was louder, hissing warnings of career suicide if he made enemies so early on. Denise pushed her cart down the hallway, her shoulders held high despite the whispers and laughter that trailed behind her. There was a strength in her silence, a resilience forged from years of being treated as less than human by those who considered themselves superior. But Denise had learned something over the years, something she kept buried beneath her calm demeanor and tireless work ethic. It was a lesson those executives would soon learn the hard way, because the world had a funny way of turning tables. And tomorrow, When she walked into Hamilton and Reese, it wouldn't be with her cleaning cart. The phone call had come just last week, an opportunity she hadn't dared to dream of. The kind of offer that could transform lives, if only she was brave enough to take it. And she had been. Fearless, determined, ready. Denise had spent years watching them all, studying their habits, learning their weaknesses, understanding their motivations. But more than that, she had spent years working on herself, taking online courses, expanding her knowledge, acquiring skills that went far beyond mopping floors and dusting desks. Now she was ready to reveal what lay beneath her humble exterior, ready to show them that power didn't always wear a tailored suit or carry a fancy title. And when she stepped into the building tomorrow, she wouldn't be pushing a cart. She'd be carrying the weight of her own destiny. They wouldn't see her coming, but they'd remember her long after she was done. The following morning, the atmosphere at Hamilton and Reese was thick with the usual urgency of high-stakes corporate life. Emails buzzed through inboxes, phones rang in quick succession, and the sound of rapid keystrokes created a steady hum of productivity. The executives were already bustling about, their conversations filled with jargon, mergers, profits, and ambitions. Ethan Brooks sauntered through the hallway with his usual swagger, a smirk dancing on his lips as he adjusted the lapels of his suit. The junior manager's morning ritual always included stopping by the break room to bask in the attention of his colleagues. He loved the casual cruelty of their conversations, the way mocking others seemed to bind them together in their little clique of privilege. Today was no different. He found Julia Sanders pouring herself a cup of coffee, her gaze flicking up to acknowledge him before shifting back to her phone. They exchanged the usual banter, their words laced with sarcasm and thinly veiled disdain for anyone they deemed beneath them. "Did you see the cleaning lady this morning?" Ethan asked, a laugh already bubbling in his throat. "I swear, she must live here. I bet if we cut her loose for a week, she'd come crawling back begging for work." Julia chuckled, stirring cream into her coffee with a silver spoon. "Please, Ethan. People like her don't have options. They do what they're told because that's all they know. That's why we're up here, and they're down there." Their laughter echoed down the corridor, a careless sound that bounced off the marble floors and ricocheted into offices where no one dared to challenge them. Mark Stevens heard every word. He stood just around the corner, his fingers clutched tightly around the portfolio he was supposed to deliver to his supervisor. His stomach twisted with a familiar mixture of guilt and frustration. Each day seemed to bring more of the same cruelty, and each day Mark felt a little smaller for his silence. The truth was, he admired Denise. He had watched her move through the office with quiet dignity, her hard work and dedication so effortlessly dismissed by those who prided themselves on their supposed superiority. Mark had even struck up a few conversations with her on the rare occasions he found himself alone in the office late at night, their words exchanged over the hum of vacuum cleaners and the distant glow of city lights. She was smart, far smarter than most of the people who occupied the building's upper floors, the kind of wisdom that came not from textbooks or corporate seminars, but from living, from understanding struggle and resilience on a level most of them could never comprehend. But Mark was just an intern. His voice carried no weight, his influence non-existent. He was caught between ambition and conscience, a delicate balance that threatened to tip with every smirk and sneer he ignored. Today, however, there was a new energy crackling through the air, something beyond the usual cutthroat drive of Hamilton and Reese. Even Mark could feel it, though he couldn't yet name it. He delivered his portfolio to his supervisor and hurried back to his small desk. As he scrolled through emails, a notification appeared at the top of his screen. An emergency meeting had been scheduled for all employees. Attendance was mandatory. Mark's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. Emergency meetings were rare, especially one involving the entire company. And the timing seemed odd. It wasn't the end of the quarter, no scandal had leaked, and profits were on the rise. What could possibly be so urgent? Curiosity buzzed through the office as employees gathered in the large conference hall. The room was sleek, modern, and designed to impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the city skyline. But today, even the breathtaking view couldn't hold their attention. Executives clustered in small groups, their voices low with speculation. Mark found himself seated near the back, his nervousness amplified by the intensity of the whispers around him. Ethan and Julia were only a few seats away, still exchanging smug glances as if whatever was about to happen couldn't possibly affect them. The door swung open, and the murmurs died down as the CEO, Richard Hamilton himself, strode to the front of the room. A man in his mid-50s with salt and pepper hair and a presence that commanded respect, Richard rarely made appearances outside his top-level meetings. His presence alone was enough to chill the air with anticipation. "Thank you all for gathering on such short notice," Richard began, his voice deep and authoritative. "I'm sure you're all wondering why this meeting was called, and I'll get straight to the point. Effective immediately, there will be a major restructuring of this company's leadership." A ripple of surprise swept through the room. Even Ethan's smug expression faltered. Mark watched as a flicker of confusion crossed Julia's perfectly composed face. Richard continued, his gaze sweeping over the crowd with calculated precision. "For too long, we have operated under a flawed system, a system that has allowed arrogance, entitlement, and a complete disregard for human decency to flourish. That changes today." Mark's heartbeat quickened. Whatever was happening, it was unlike anything he'd ever witnessed. The words were a direct condemnation, a sharp rebuke aimed at the very culture Hamilton and Reese had fostered for years. "To guide this change, we will be appointing a new chief operating officer, someone who exemplifies the values we claim to uphold, someone who understands the meaning of hard work, integrity, and respect." Richard paused, letting his words hang heavy in the air. His eyes met Mark's for the briefest moment before continuing. "Please welcome our new COO, Ms. Denise Parker." The room went deathly silent. Mark's mouth dropped open, his eyes widening as his brain struggled to process what he'd just heard. Ethan's expression twisted with disbelief. "What kind of joke is this?" he whispered, his voice cracking under the strain of his shock. But it was no joke. The conference room doors opened once more, and Denise Parker stepped inside. Gone was the plain navy blue uniform. Instead, she wore a crisp, tailored suit of deep charcoal that fit her perfectly. Her posture was tall, commanding, and filled with a confidence that radiated from her very being. And her eyes, those same kind eyes, now held a fire that burned brighter than any fluorescent light in the building. Mark felt his heart swell with admiration. Denise wasn't just here to prove a point. She was here to take her rightful place, and not a single person in that room would be left unchanged. Denise Parker's presence in the conference room was like a force of nature. The executives who had spent years perfecting their air of confidence suddenly looked like deer caught in headlights. Ethan's face had turned a shade paler, his mouth hanging open as if his brain had short-circuited. Julia's eyes were wide with shock, her perfect composure shattered like fragile glass. Mark couldn't take his eyes off Denise. The transformation was stunning, but not surprising. He had seen her work ethic, her quiet intelligence, the way she carried herself even when those around her treated her like she was nothing. He had sensed something special about her, something powerful simmering beneath the surface. But even he hadn't anticipated this. Denise's heels clicked against the polished marble floor as she approached the front of the room. She walked with a kind of grace that came from years of struggle and perseverance, a calm confidence that only those who had truly fought their way to the top could possess. The very people who had dismissed her were now squirming under the weight of their own prejudice. Richard Hamilton greeted her with a firm handshake and a respectful nod before gesturing for her to address the room. Denise's gaze swept over the assembled executives, interns, and department heads, her eyes sharp and assessing. Gone was the humility of someone just trying to make it through the day. What stood before them was a woman who had earned her place at the table and who would not be denied her due respect. "Good morning, everyone," Denise began, her voice smooth and strong. The calm authority she projected sent chills down the spines of more than a few of the executives. I know this is unexpected for many of you, but I assure you, this transition has been a long time coming. Her words were deliberate, her gaze piercing as it met the eyes of those who had mocked her. Ethan flinched visibly when her gaze rested on him for a fraction of a second longer than the others. I started working at Hamilton and Reese 20 years ago, Denise continued. Not as an executive or even a manager. I started as a cleaning woman, the lowest position in the company's hierarchy. I scrubbed floors, emptied trash cans, cleaned toilets. Tasks that some of you would never even consider doing. But every day I observed, I listened. I learned. Her words were like daggers, cutting through the arrogance and superiority that had so often polluted the company's culture. The stunned silence in the room was palpable, the shame on some of their faces unmistakable. I worked my way up, not through nepotism or favoritism, but through sheer hard work, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to bettering myself. Along the way, I earned degrees in business administration, leadership, and management. And when Mr. Hamilton approached me with an offer to join the board of directors as a consultant last year, I accepted. But under one condition, that my identity be kept anonymous until I was ready to take on this role fully. The murmurs that rippled through the crowd were tinged with disbelief, embarrassment, and even admiration. Mark could see it in their eyes, the dawning realization that their assumptions had been utterly, laughably wrong. But I didn't just work to improve my own standing, Denise continued. I worked to understand the culture of this company, its strengths and its flaws. And make no mistake, there are serious flaws. A culture of elitism, of arrogance, of casual cruelty. And that stops now. Julia shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her face flushed with embarrassment. Ethan's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. His ego was crumbling under the weight of Denise's words, and Mark found himself fighting the urge to laugh. The truth is, some of you have contributed to that toxic culture. You've made assumptions about people based on their roles, their appearances, their perceived worth. And I'm here to tell you that's over. Effective immediately, we are implementing a comprehensive overhaul of our corporate structure and our values. Promotions will be based on merit, respect will be a requirement, not a suggestion, and those who fail to adapt will find themselves left behind. A heavy silence filled the room, the kind that followed a devastating storm. No one dared to speak, to challenge her authority. Mark watched with growing admiration as Denise stood her ground, her gaze unwavering, her presence undeniable. Now, I understand that change is difficult, Denise said, her tone softening slightly. But change is also necessary. If this company is to thrive, it must evolve. And evolution begins with acknowledging past mistakes and moving forward with integrity. Mark couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. For the first time, it seemed like someone truly understood the damage that had been done by those in power. Someone was finally willing to challenge the status quo and rebuild something better. I will be holding individual meetings with each department head over the next few weeks, Denise announced, and I will be making sure that everyone's contributions are properly acknowledged. From the highest-ranking executive to the newest intern, your worth will be determined by your character and your performance, not by your title. She glanced briefly in Mark's direction, and he felt a rush of gratitude. His admiration for Denise deepened, his respect solidified. For years, he had been told to keep his head down, to focus on climbing the corporate ladder and ignore the injustice around him. But now, it felt like there was finally someone willing to lift him up rather than step over him. Denise concluded her speech with a simple, powerful statement. Respect isn't something you're given because of your title or your wealth. It's something you earn, and it's something I expect from every single one of you. With that, she stepped back, her expression calm and resolute. Richard Hamilton nodded approvingly before addressing the room once more. Thank you, Ms. Parker. I believe you all understand what's expected moving forward. Dismissed. Chairs scraped against the floor as employees slowly rose to their feet, their expressions a mix of shock, embarrassment, and reluctant admiration. Mark stood as well, his mind racing with the implications of everything he had just witnessed. Ethan stormed out of the room, his face twisted with anger and resentment. Julia followed, her expression more composed but no less shaken. Others filed out, their murmurs filled with uncertainty and fear of what this new leadership would mean for their futures. But Mark felt something else entirely. He felt inspired, energized, ready to embrace the change Denise had promised. And he wasn't the only one. Denise Parker's impact on Hamilton and Reese was immediate and absolute. The executives were still reeling from the revelation that the woman they had belittled for years was now their superior. But Denise didn't seem interested in basking in the shock she'd caused. Instead, she got to work. The morning after her announcement, Denise held her first official meeting with the board of directors. The atmosphere was tense. The old guard had ruled over the company with ironclad arrogance, and her sudden presence had rattled them to the core. "Thank you all for attending," Denise began, her voice steady and cool. "Today, we're going to start addressing the culture within this company and the changes that need to be made. I expect full cooperation from everyone in this room. Let me be clear. Resistance to these changes will not be tolerated." She didn't have to name names for the message to be heard. Ethan's glare could have melted steel, his resentment boiling just beneath the surface. Julia, meanwhile, sat with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her expression rigid but carefully controlled. "I've spent years observing this company," Denise continued. "I've seen both its brilliance and its flaws. And I'm not here to tear it down. I'm here to rebuild it. We will create a culture of respect, accountability, and genuine leadership that starts today." Richard Hamilton nodded along with her words, his approval evident. He had been the one to offer Denise her position on the board. But even he hadn't anticipated her making such a dramatic entrance. Yet he respected her resolve, admired her strategic brilliance. Denise began detailing her vision: mandatory sensitivity training, mentorship programs designed to foster growth rather than competition, and an open-door policy for employees at all levels to voice their concerns without fear of retaliation. But it wasn't just talk. Denise presented clear, actionable plans with timelines, budgets, and personnel assignments. Promotions will no longer be based solely on numbers or connections, Denise said firmly. They will be based on merit, creativity, and integrity. Those who contribute positively to the company's growth will be rewarded. Those who use their positions to demean or exploit others will find themselves without a place here. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but none dared to challenge her. They could see that Denise was not simply making empty promises. She was here to create real change. When the meeting adjourned, most of the executives left with tight smiles and stiff nods. But not Mark. He lingered, his hands clenching and unclenching nervously. "Ms. Parker." Mark approached her cautiously. "I just wanted to say, I really admire what you're trying to do here. And if there's anything I can do to help, I'd like to volunteer." Denise's expression softened. "Thank you, Mark. I appreciate your support. And I remember you. You're one of the few who never treated me like I was invisible. That kind of character doesn't go unnoticed." Mark's cheeks flushed with gratitude. "It's just the way some people act around here. It's disgusting. I've seen good employees get pushed out because they weren't part of the inner circle. And I've been told to keep my head down if I want to keep my internship. But that's not who I am." "That's precisely why we need people like you on our team," Denise said with a smile. "I'll be creating a committee to address the toxicity within the company. I want you on it." "Me?" Mark's eyes widened. "But I'm just an intern. Everyone starts somewhere. And if you've got the courage to stand up for what's right, then you've already proven yourself more valuable than half the people at this firm." Mark's gratitude was practically glowing. "Thank you, Ms. Parker. I won't let you down. I know you won't. And call me Denise." As Mark left the room, his enthusiasm palpable, Denise allowed herself a small smile. For the first time, she could see a glimmer of the company's potential. There were good people here, people worth fighting for, and she intended to give them the platform to thrive. But the work was only beginning. Throughout the next few weeks, Denise immersed herself in the intricate mechanics of Hamilton and Reese. She held individual meetings with department heads, conducted anonymous surveys to gather feedback from employees at all levels, and personally reviewed cases of employees who had been unfairly dismissed or demoted. Her dedication was relentless, her standards were high, and her reputation grew faster than anyone could have anticipated. Yet, not everyone was ready to embrace her vision. Ethan Brooks, in particular, had made it clear that he considered her presence an insult. His passive-aggressive comments during meetings were obvious, his disdain practically dripping from his words. One afternoon, as Denise was reviewing a proposal in her newly assigned office, Ethan barged in without so much as a knock. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You waltz in here like you own the place, preaching about change and respect, but you're just here to tear us down. Do you even understand how this company works? Or are you just here to satisfy some ego trip?" Denise looked up from her work, her expression serene. "I understand how this company works, Ethan. I also understand that you're feeling threatened, but that's not my fault. It's yours. My fault." He laughed bitterly. "You think you can just waltz in here after years of scrubbing floors and tell us how to do our jobs? It's laughable." "What's laughable is your refusal to see the truth," Denise replied coolly. "I've done the work. I've earned my place here. And if you can't handle that, then you're welcome to leave." Ethan stared at her, his eyes narrowed. But for once, he had nothing to say. His arrogance had finally collided with a force he couldn't undermine. Without another word, he turned on his heel and stormed out. Denise watched him go, her expression unreadable. It was clear to her that Ethan wasn't going to be an ally, but he was just one man, and her mission was far bigger than his fragile ego. As the weeks unfolded, Denise's transformation of Hamilton and Reese continued to gain momentum. Every corner of the company began feeling the effects of her leadership. The once toxic atmosphere slowly shifted as employees found their voices and trusted that they could speak up without retribution. Her committee, now officially named the Integrity and Innovation Council, attracted a variety of staff members, everyone from junior interns like Mark to senior managers who had grown weary of the culture of fear. Denise held weekly meetings where employees could propose ideas, voice concerns, and collaborate on solutions. But not everyone was pleased. Ethan Brooks's disdain had only grown sharper, his resentment festering beneath his professional exterior. His circle of allies within the company had dwindled, leaving him increasingly isolated. And yet, his arrogance remained stubbornly intact. One afternoon, Denise received a summons to Richard Hamilton's office. As she made her way through the pristine glass corridors, she couldn't help but notice the curious glances from employees. Some were filled with admiration, others with suspicion. She couldn't please everyone, but she didn't need to. Her focus was on doing what was right, not what was popular. "Denise," Richard greeted her warmly as she entered his expansive office. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the bustling city below, and sunlight spilled across his mahogany desk. "Please, have a seat." "Thank you," Denise replied, taking the leather chair across from him. "I've been reviewing the reports from the council you established," Richard began, his tone calm but probing. "And I have to say, the feedback is overwhelmingly positive. Morale is higher than it's been in years, and productivity has improved as well. I commend you for that." "I appreciate it, Richard, but we still have a long way to go. There are employees here who feel silenced, neglected, and outright disrespected. Changing that won't happen overnight." "No, it won't," Richard agreed. His gaze shifted, his fingers interlacing thoughtfully. "But there is one concern that's been brought to my attention." "Oh," Denise raised an eyebrow. "It's Ethan Brooks. He's filed a formal complaint against you, accusing you of creating a hostile work environment." Denise's expression remained steady. I see. And how exactly have I created a hostile work environment? Richard slid a folder across the desk. He claims that your leadership style is overly authoritarian, that you're targeting him specifically and undermining his authority. He also claims that you're allowing unqualified employees to make decisions that should be left to upper management. The accusations were as predictable as they were petty. Ethan was grasping at straws, desperate to regain control over a narrative he was rapidly losing. I've made it clear from the beginning that everyone's voice matters, Denise replied, including his. What Ethan considers undermining his authority is simply me holding him to the same standards as everyone else. And as for allowing unqualified employees to contribute, that's called collaboration. Leadership isn't about hoarding power. It's about empowering those around you to excel. Richard nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I had a feeling that would be your response. I'll be speaking to Ethan personally, but I needed to hear your side of things first. Richard, I have no interest in fighting personal battles, Denise continued. My goal is to build something that works. Ethan's opposition to change is understandable, but if he's unwilling to adapt, then he has no place here. It's that simple. Understood. And rest assured, his complaint will be handled appropriately. Richard's gaze softened. I'll admit, Denise, you've been a revelation. This company needed a shake-up, and you've delivered. Thank you, Denise replied, her sincerity evident. But this isn't about proving a point or settling scores. It's about making sure everyone here has the chance to thrive, including Ethan, if he chooses to rise above his own bitterness. After her conversation with Richard, Denise continued her efforts to reshape the company. But she couldn't ignore the persistent tension surrounding Ethan's presence. He had become increasingly disruptive during meetings, his comments laced with sarcasm and thinly veiled insults. At first, Denise chose to ignore him, refusing to be drawn into his petty attempts at undermining her authority. But the breaking point came during a particularly important presentation regarding the company's long-term strategic goals. Ethan interrupted her presentation multiple times, challenging her proposals with barely concealed contempt. His tone was openly disrespectful, his hostility growing more brazen by the minute. Ethan, Denise said firmly, her eyes locking onto his. You seem to have a lot of concerns. Instead of disrupting this presentation, how about you present your alternative solutions? He blinked, caught off guard. I wasn't. No, please. Go ahead. If you have a better plan for how we can move this company forward, I'm all ears. But if all you're offering is criticism without solutions, then I suggest you step aside and let those who are actually willing to work do their jobs. The room fell silent. All eyes were on Ethan, who shifted uncomfortably under the weight of the attention. For a moment, he opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. His cheeks flushed with humiliation, but he said nothing. Thought so, Denise said, her voice as calm as ever. Now, if we can continue. Ethan's face twisted with resentment, but he remained quiet for the rest of the meeting. That evening, as Denise prepared to leave her office, she found Mark waiting for her outside her door. Hey, Denise, he said, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. I just wanted to tell you, I've been hearing a lot of people talking. And it's good stuff. They're saying how you're actually listening to them, giving them a chance to be heard. I mean, you've got the whole place buzzing. Denise smiled, her exhaustion easing slightly. Thanks, Mark. It's been a lot of work, but if people are feeling heard, then it's worth it. It definitely is. And I just wanted you to know that. Well, some of us have your back. You've got a lot more allies here than you probably realize. The words struck Denise harder than Mark could have known. For so long, she had been the one overlooked, disregarded, dismissed, and now she was the one building something new. Thank you, Mark. That means more than you know. He grinned. Just keep doing what you're doing. The ones who matter see it. Denise nodded, her resolve solidifying. She wasn't here to chase validation or destroy her detractors. She was here to build something greater than anyone had imagined. And no one, not Ethan, not the old guard clinging to their broken system, was going to stop her. Ethan's sabotage attempts only intensified over the next few weeks. His frustration at being ignored by Denise's unshakable composure and rising influence grew into desperation. He began whispering to anyone who would listen, fueling paranoia about how Denise's reforms were stripping the company of its traditions, tearing apart what had made Hamilton and Reese a pillar of corporate success for decades. Denise remained undeterred. Every day, she showed up, worked harder, and lifted others along with her. The Integrity and Innovation Council thrived under her leadership, launching projects that empowered employees to contribute fresh ideas without fear of mockery or dismissal. The company's internal reports showed productivity climbing and profits steadily increasing. More importantly, the workplace culture was shifting, becoming warmer, more inclusive. But Ethan couldn't see it, or rather, he refused to see it. His determination to cling to the old ways blinded him to the progress happening all around him. His attempts to sabotage Denise's work became clumsier, more transparent. Complaints about him began to pile up, and whispers of his own inefficiency circulated among the senior staff. One morning, Denise found herself summoned once again to Richard Hamilton's office. The air felt different this time, less formal, more charged with a sense of conclusion. As she entered, she noticed Ethan already seated in front of Richard's desk, his face pale and eyes defiant. "Good morning, Denise," Richard greeted her with a tight-lipped smile. His eyes were tired but resolute. "Please, have a seat." "Of course," Denise replied, keeping her composure as she took the chair beside Ethan. "I won't waste your time," Richard said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "I've been monitoring the situation between the two of you closely. I've read every report, spoken with your colleagues, and reviewed Ethan's repeated complaints. What I've found is simple. Denise, you've brought positive change to this company, while Ethan has chosen to cling to the past at the expense of our future." Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came out. His arrogance had finally collided with reality. "Ethan," Richard continued, his tone cold and sharp, "effective immediately, your employment with Hamilton and Reese is terminated. You have demonstrated a complete inability to adapt, and worse, a deliberate effort to undermine the progress we are making here. Your behavior is unacceptable, and I cannot allow it to continue." Ethan's eyes widened, his breathing shallow. You can't be serious. I've been here for years. I've earned my position." "And you've squandered it with your own actions," Richard interrupted. "Your status here was earned, yes, but respect and authority are privileges, not entitlements. You've shown nothing but contempt for your colleagues, and you've actively worked against the betterment of this company. This decision is final." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan looked from Richard to Denise, his expression shifting from anger to desperation. But Denise's gaze remained calm, unwavering. "You brought this on yourself, Ethan," Denise said, her voice devoid of malice, but brimming with truth. "Maybe it's time you take a hard look at why you couldn't adapt. Blaming others won't change the outcome." Ethan shot to his feet, his fists clenched. But there was nothing more he could do. Without another word, he stormed out of the office, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. When the door clicked shut, Richard let out a weary sigh. I had hoped he would change. But sometimes people are too invested in their own arrogance to see the damage they're causing. "I understand," Denise replied softly, "and I appreciate you handling the situation." "Denise, you've earned more than just my respect," Richard said, his gaze steady. "You've earned the trust of this entire company. And for that, I want to offer you something more." Denise's brows furrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" "An executive position, one with real authority. I want you to oversee our new employee empowerment and innovation division. It's something you practically built from the ground up, and there's no one better suited to lead it than you." The offer stunned her. Denise had never sought power for the sake of power, but the opportunity to continue making meaningful change, that was something she couldn't ignore. "I'm honored, Richard, and I'd be proud to take on that role," she said, her voice steady, her heart full. "Excellent. We'll make the official announcement next week." Richard extended his hand, and Denise shook it firmly, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle upon her shoulders. The following days were a whirlwind of meetings, strategic planning, and long conversations with employees eager to contribute to the company's transformation. Denise poured herself into her new role, her dedication and passion shining through in everything she did. But perhaps the most unexpected moment came when Mark Stevens, the young intern who had first shown her kindness, knocked on her office door one afternoon. "Hey, Denise," Mark said, grinning shyly. "I just wanted to thank you. You've really made this place better. And, well, I've been promoted. They want me to join the leadership training program." "That's amazing, Mark." Denise beamed, genuinely happy for him. "You deserve it. Your hard work and integrity speak for themselves." "Thanks," Mark replied, his voice slightly choked with emotion. "But honestly, I couldn't have done it without you. Watching you stand up for what's right, it made me realize that I don't have to just fit into someone else's mold. I can actually be part of making things better." "That's the whole point," Denise said with a gentle smile. "Empowering others to make a difference. And now it's your turn to do the same." Mark nodded, his eyes glistening with gratitude. As he left her office, Denise felt a warmth spread through her chest. This was what true leadership looked like. Not dominance, not authority for the sake of control, but the ability to inspire and uplift others. Hamilton and Reese was no longer the same place it had been when she first walked in with her cleaning cart. The transformation was far from complete, but they were on the right path. And Denise Parker intended to lead them there, one empowered voice at a time.